Hey. All right, everybody, welcome to this little special DKNOG 10 that we have here today. It's not the circumstances I imagined standing here on. I actually didn't imagine standing here at this time at all. But we will prevail with DKNOG 10 despite all the odds against us. It's going to be a little bit of a special day today. Things are not going to run as smoothly as we might have hoped they will, but we do have a full program for you today. And the website will be updated with the program, and we'll have speakers dialing in, doing remote speaks, and we have speakers here in the hotel today. And I'd just like to thank everybody who's had the time and the courage to come here today, and everybody who's watching us on the stream, despite the odds that we have against us. DKNOG 10 was supposed to be something very special for us. DKNOG 10 was the 10-year anniversary of us. 10 years or 10 years, that's maybe a definition of questions, but it's going to be our 10th conference. We had a record registration of 232 participants. Until Monday, we had like 50 cancellations. Then everything went to hell. So the remote attendance thing is now the primary way of doing DKNOG 10, and maybe it's something we have to get used to in the future. We had 8 speaker cancellations. We had 4 hours of missing content. But we also had some really, really fantastic people step up in the last minute, giving us their help, doing talks with very short notice, and we are very grateful for that. So today things are going to be a little bit different. We will run a full program, as I said, and we will run from basically now until like 5 in the evening. There will be no program tomorrow. We want everybody to be able to interact with us and enjoy this presentation as if they were here in person. It's obviously not going to be like that, but we will do our best to do it. And one of the ways we're going to do that is by using Slack for questions. If Slack doesn't work, we have an IRC channel, but we'll try to use a Slack channel for it. And if you're watching this, you're probably watching it on YouTube, or you're sitting in the room already. The channel DKNOG 10 will be used for questions. Please keep all other chatters to some of the other channels. This is not as relevant as it was yesterday, but it's still relevant. Wash your hands, do the funny way of greeting, do the namaste, live long and prosper, and all that. I just wanted, because we also had another chat on another talk on the agenda, which was to celebrate these 10, so I'm just going to walk through this slides very quickly, just because I have a little bit of time now. So, 10 years of DKNOG, we say. Well, is that even true? The first DKNOG was in 2011, so that's not 10 years. However, I found this email that I sent in 2009 inviting people to the second night out with the DKNOG community. So, in a way, we're 11 years old. But at that time, it was social only. And now we are something quite else. I just want to walk you through how we progressed through the years. If we start with DKNOG 1, we were 70 people in the room. This was a small room in Copenhagen. Then we grew to 99, 101, 126. Had a little dip, but since DKNOG 7, we've only become bigger. And 223 was the number this year. Maybe it would have been 500 without this corona stuff. You never know. So it all started on October the 7th in 2010, where 4 people went out to eat burgers and found the DKNOG Association. These people were Thomas Kjært, Benjamin Blangstrup, Mikkel Mondrup, and myself. We decided to found an association so we could have some organization to create conferences under. So we did. And these are some iPhone pictures from 2011, so the quality is quite terrible, but at least we have some proof that we did something in 2011. And it was a great success. And a lot of people started to show interest of it. We were, Bjørn and I was featured in a magazine from PROSA, which is the Union of IT Professionals, talking about self-empowerment in the industry. We were driven voluntarily, and we met up. This picture on the right is from a a planning session in the offices of Telia, I believe, and is also from the early days. Fast forward to DKNOG 7, which started the beginning of a stronger DKNOG tradition. We experimented with various formats, the 2-track format, which was unfortunately not a success. We had more attendees there, and it kickstarted the idea that if we started becoming more professional around DKNOG, we could make something that was even better. I have a few pictures of some of the rooms and the sessions from DKNOG 7. Packed rooms, but despite the two-session format, 2-track format, the rooms were packed, maybe not at the same time. The audience was engaged, and we really believe we have created a platform that allows people to collaborate better within the Nordic region. So that leaves us at this event, DKNOG 10, which was supposed to be our most professional DKNOG so far, and now you have me standing here. We organized it with a small steering group and an independent program committee. We've hired an event manager that allows us to do more of the stuff that we like to do and less of the admin. I'd like to give a special thank to all the volunteers who's been involved in DKNOG throughout the years. I hope this list is complete. I really hope I haven't forgotten somebody, and if I have, I'm really, really, truly sorry. Some other notably mentions, I'd like to thank Prosa, who did our bookkeeping in the beginning, Rack Hosting and Dyke, who do our service, and everybody in the DKNOG IRC channel. And an extra special thank you goes to NetNod, because we have not had a better sponsor than NetNod, who's been with us from the very beginning. For every single year, they've sponsored our socials with the biggest, which has been the biggest sponsorship post we could have. So we are insanely grateful for that. And I could also not wish for a better timing right now, because Jan has just stepped into the door with a little thing that we would like to give NetNod. So Siri, perhaps you can come up here on the stage. I don't know if we can do this on video probably. But yeah, logistics has gone a little bit to hell, so I'm packing this up for the first time, and I would like just to, let's see, just for the screen, this is a little token of our appreciation.
Thank you very much.
Here you go. And thank you very much for your support.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that we are very honored to sponsor it, and we are happy to see that you showed the numbers, how it's increased, and we are happy to be here for more than 10 years ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much again. I think, let's see. I think we will head on to the first talk of the day. I'm pretty sure you're tired of hearing me already. So the first one on the stage today is going to be Susan, who's going to tell us about the RPKI things at Hurricane Electric.
Hello, I'm Susan Forney from Hurricane Electric, and of course I'm very grateful to be here today, and very thankful for all of the accommodations that have been made to allow me to give this presentation. We really are very thankful. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is RPKI. Now, as you know, as of February 23rd, 2020, the following ISPs had announced that they were filtering for RPKI validation and dropping RPKI invalids. AT&T at AS7018, Cloudflare, Cogent AS174, KPN, PCCW, Tata, and Telia. But as of February 24th, 2020, there was one more. Hurricane Electric, AS6939, began filtering for RPKI and dropping invalids. Now, I know that last year we said that we were going to do this in March. And Job Snyder's, I'm sorry, we lied. We did it in February. So What I'd like to do is talk to you about our filtering algorithm for how we are doing this, because at Hurricane, we've always been very transparent about how we accept routes on our network. And so I'm going to walk you through what it is that we're doing for how we accept the RPKI and how we do the filtering that allows us to drop these invalids. So first, for the filter generations that we do for all of our peers, we first try to find the AS set to use for this network, because that gives us the beginning information of what we need to create the filter. Then we inspect the OTNUM for the ASN to see if we can extract from their IRR policy what they would announce to Hurricane by finding the export, the MP export to AS6939NE, ASNE. Then we look to see if they have a valid IRR AS set name in PeeringDB, which, you know, to give PeeringDB a plug, it's a great idea to make sure that you document these things publicly, and it does help networks like ours to accept all of your routes. Then after that, we collect the received routes for all BGP sessions with this ASN, and then that details both the accepted and the filtered routes. If there are no received routes for this AS, we perform the following process for the first 10 prefixes from their IRR policy. So for each route, and then for the routes that we have, obviously we do this too. For each route, we perform the following rejection tests. First, we reject prefix links less than the minimum and greater than the maximum. For IPv4, that's a /8 to a /24. For IPv6, it's a /24 to a /48. We reject bogons, that's the RFC 1918 stuff, documentation, prefix, default routes, we don't accept those, et cetera. Then we reject exchange prefixes for all exchanges that Hurricane Electric is connected to. And this is a huge problem of people trying to re-announce their exchange, internet exchange prefixes to us, which is why we have to do it. So then we reject routes that have RPKI status as invalid or invalid length based on origin AS and prefix. So that's the first rejection that happens is RPKI. After that, if the RPKI is not valid or invalid, if it's unknown, then we're going to perform the following acceptance tests. Accept routes that have RPKI status valid based on the origin AS prefix, obviously. Compare the RIR handles for the prefix and the peer AS to make sure that they match the prefix. Check if this prefix matches a prefix allowed by IRR policy of the peer. And then reject all prefixes that are not explicitly accepted. So that's how we get the routes into the network. And we do perform on our peers a new prefix filter every 24 hours. And the RPKI has been added to that process with this algorithm. For our customers, we generate basically on demand, either if they can have a managed service where they get it every 24 hours, or they can call us up and get it whenever they want to. So for most of the network, it's every 24 hours it would get updated. Now, if you want to know how your network measures up at Hurricane Electric, fortunately, we have the following tools to help you understand how we're accepting your routes. First, there's bgp.he.net, which is our classic site featuring information about the public sources, about BGP and the internet. And then there's routing.he.net, which is our site that lets you look at any network that is in Hurricane Electric's BGP table and see how we filtered the routes. So not just yours, but if you're curious about how any route is in the table, for example, if you want to know where we get, how we're getting routes from Google or for Cloudflare or anybody else, you can look this up on routing.he.net. It's all there publicly. So here's bgp.he.net. We were retro before retro was cool. And you can see that we have AS4468684 here, which is Mythic Beasts, and full disclosure, a relative of mine. So that's why I put it up here. Anyway, you can see here that Mythic Beast has done a pretty good job of documenting this IPv4 space that they have. All but one of the routes shown, prefixes shown here, have RPKI. And you can tell which ones have RPKI valid on bgp.he.net because they have that little green key next to the prefix. The little green check next to the prefix means they also have IRR information that is valid. So we can see that for 185.101.96.0/24, there is no valid, there is no RPKI key at all. It's not valid or invalid. But there is IR information. So we know it has a valid origin. So if that little green check is there, it means that the IRR information within some RIR someplace has a valid origin for this prefix for this AS. Now, if it isn't valid, this is kind of what it looks like. So, and I would point out too that if the IRR information were invalid, it would be a red check next to the prefix as well for this particular one. And it would also mean that that prefix was seen in BGP someplace on the internet with an invalid origin. And what we're seeing here is that for this one, it's not, these red keys here for this are not bad. What this means is that, for example, for the first prefix, the 43.2236.0/22, they have a valid RPKI ROA for that 22. They did not create ROAs for all the 24s. So even though they're being advertised on the internet, they're showing up as red because they didn't bother to create ROAs for those individual 24s. So it isn't necessarily a bad thing when you see the key. You just kind of have to look at it. Now, this information about RPKI valids and invalids actually is not new at Hurricane Electric. We've been tracking that since 2012, and about that time putting it on bgp.he.net. You may not remember seeing it. That's because back then, not very many prefixes were valid or invalid. So there wasn't very much information on there, and most of the time, if you looked at someone's page on bgp.he.net, you didn't see any information for like that because it wasn't there. So then, if you're satisfied with the way the RPKI status looks for your network, you can also check out routing.he.net, which is where we'll give you the information about how we're filtering these things. So if you put your AS in the little box that's extremely faint and probably hard to see and click submit, you'll get something like this. There's going to be a page that comes up with your AS, and again, I've used our friends at Mythic Beasts, and it gives you all of the peering sessions that we see with Hurricane. So whether they are peers with us or customer sessions or whatever, all those sessions are listed. And you notice that they're broken down into IPv4 and IPv6 sessions, and behind each session there's the status, the time the prefix was, the time the filter was built, the number of lines, the prefixes that we received, and the number of filter lines that are in that we use. And then there's the policy, which you can display, and the reasons for that policy. So if we go to the first one and we look at the actual filter, this is what the filter for Mythic Beast looks like on Hurricane Electric, more or less. I mean, obviously, it's a real prefix list, and this is a generic generated one that we stick on the site. But this is what is, in fact, in the prefix filter for Mythic Beasts. And if you looked at your network on routing.he.net, if you have a session with us, you would see the filter that we're using for your network. And it lists every single prefix that's being allowed. Then, if you click on the reasons, you're going to be able to see why we accepted them. And you can see in this list here that because Mythic Beasts has a lot of RPKI information, that we're accepting most of their prefixes because they are RPKI status valid. If they're unknown, you can see that it says prefix matched IRR policy. Now, if the RPKI status were unknown and the prefix were rejected because it wasn't IRR policy, it would say why it was denied. And it would say that the RPKI status was unknown, and it would say that IRR status was, the IRR policy made it be denied. So it's very clear as to why your routes aren't getting accepted, so you don't have to wonder. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, let's look at the current state of RPKI and see how things are going. Right now, of the validation for unique IPv4 prefixes, and this data I got from NIST in the US, mostly because I could find the numbers I was looking for, and I'm sure there are other sites, and if you want to suggest them to me, I'm happy to hear those. But this is what I used. So we see that for globally, for about 80% of the prefixes, there are RPKI unknown in the global table. And about 19% of the prefixes are valid, and only a very small 1% of these prefixes are RPKI invalid. So, you know, from a sense of how we are doing with, you know, keeping our records up, that doesn't look too bad for the things that we've managed to record. Now, if you look at the number of ROAs that are being registered by each RIR as a percentage of the global table, you get this. And first you notice that the winner in that category is RIPE, that 36% of the ROAs registered on the internet are registered within RIPE. In second place is LACNIC with 32%. APNIC has 18%. ARIN has 9%, and AFRINIC has 5%. But I didn't feel like that was incredibly useful because it doesn't take into account the distribution of the IP space. So I decided to look at the ROAs versus the total amount of IP space on the internet to give you an idea of how things are going. And this is kind of where RIPE has a lot of bragging rights, because you can see that they've got the, like around 35, 36% of the ROAs, percent of IPs with ROAs, but they only have about a quarter of the IP space on the internet. So even though they have a quarter of the IP space on the internet, they have globally 36% of the amount of ROAs registered. I couldn't find the data in time for this presentation to show the percentage of each RIR's breakdown of percentage of ROAs per IP space for RIR, but this does give you a very clear idea that RIPE has really been the lead cart puller in this race. Then LACNIC also has a huge percentage of ROAs versus the amount of IP space in the global table that it has. And ARIN, unfortunately, is very sad. It has a very small percentage of, I think we said 9% of the amount of ROAs registered in the global table, but it has about 40% of the global IP space. And clearly there's a lot of work to be done there. APNIC is not so far behind, and AFRINIC, of course, is just getting started here. If we looked at why RPKI ROAs are invalid, most of them, the big bulk of them are invalid because of the wrong AS number. They're getting rejected because it's invalid AS. That's why they are rejected. Then the next big percentage of them, about 44%, get rejected because the maximum prefix length is incorrect for the ROA. And that's what you were seeing on that slide with bgp.he.net, with that one network that had all of the invalids. It wasn't that they hadn't created ROAs, it's just they hadn't created ROAs for each individual prefix that they had. And then about 6% of them are invalid because of AS and prefix length, and then 1% is because of an invalid AS set and makes it difficult to determine what the actual underlying problem is. So let's look at what RPKI can do for your network. RPKI has a few advantages. Even if you maintain pristine IRR records, RPKI can do some things for you that IRR can't. First, ROAs protect you against bad IR records that might make it possible for another AS to advertise your prefix. And this happens because, unfortunately, it's too easy to create inaccurate IRR records, or it's too likely that inaccurate IRR records that have not been cleaned up are floating around out there, allowing prefixes to be accepted where they shouldn't be accepted. ROAs get rid of that problem because there can only be one valid ROA for every prefix. And if you look at sites like bgp.he.net or even the IRR Explorer put out by our Netherlands friends, that you can see that it is not uncommon in IRR records for prefixes to be considered IRR valid for multiple ASs, and that just doesn't happen with the ROA. So it makes ROA a lot better for that purpose. Also, ROAs are digitally signed, they can't be faked. And only RIRs who have the allocations in the first place have the trust anchors today that can sign ROAs, which means that it makes it, again, very hard for mistakes to be made, and it makes it very clear that your ROA belongs to you. So, unfortunately, while all of those good things RPKI can do for your network are there are some things that RPKI can't do for your network. And it's not that it's not worth implementing, but there are some other things that you ought to be thinking about doing besides just making sure that you have ROAs for all of your prefixes. First, you should maintain your IR records as accurately as you possibly can, and that is because the list that I showed you at the beginning of this presentation is short. The bulk of the networks in the internet are not filtering for RPKI, which means that your networks, your nicely, carefully, and diligently created ROAs will not protect you in those places, and the IRR records will be the basis upon which those networks filter, if they're even filtering at all, and there still are a lot of networks out there that are not filtering. So maintain your IR records to give yourself as much protection as you possibly can. And then you should be filtering for bogons to make sure that networks that people that should not be advertising IP space in your network are not advertising it. And if possible, you should be subscribing to one of the services that allows you to filter for unallocated IP address space, as well as the private IP space and default routes and everything else, because every day I reject prefixes that someone has tried to allocate from an RIR and they're not assigned. A lot of the times we'll get notification from the RIR that this has happened, and usually we filtered it already because it's not going to pass our filters, but there are lots of networks, again, that don't filter, and so you have to be careful, and it would help if you filtered for bogons. Use AS path filters, or what some people call peer lock, and this is because it protects you against getting re-advertised internet routes that you should not accept. And you think, well, I have a maximum prefix limit, so they can't advertise the internet to me. Well, unfortunately, in a lot of networks, some people will have their own routes that they are advertising from their own AS, and the route they advertise to you is a path that they learned from the internet. And so rather than, what's AS number, NNN, and that was the whole path, it will be, from level 3 or Cogent or whatever in the path. And if you're using AS path filters to not allow prefixes from top-tier ISPs, this will not happen to you. Also, announce all your IP space. Now, I know that a lot of people who are creating ROAs today are doing things like create the ROA against AS0 so that, it's invalid for that length. But again, not everybody is using RPKI. And when you announce all your IP space, that means that you basically claimed it, and you make it very difficult for someone to hijack your unannounced space. So it's just a good practice until everybody on the planet has a ROA, and we don't have to worry about this anymore, to make sure that you're doing that. And then set maximum prefix limits against all of your peers. This is just a really good practice. It will protect you when everything else fails, and it's always good to have multiple layers of protection when you're peering with anybody. So To give you an idea of the difference between what happens with your having a ROA on the network and what RPKI can do for you and just having IR records, I decided to take a look at a couple of route leaks. And if we look at the November 12th, 2018 Google route leak, this was when Google and a number of other services experienced a 74-minute outage because a small African ISP re-advertised about 500 Google prefixes that it had learned from its Internet Exchange server and caused a lot of havoc. RPKI alone would not help here because the AS from Google was valid. It had a valid ROA, and that would not stop you. So, in for instance, the hurricane algorithm, when it was going through the checks, it would have accepted it based that that would have passed that check. AS path filters would not have been useful because if they had created the proper IRR records for that, then it would have passed that. If you had generated your path filters before these guys experienced the outage and you didn't have them as being able to advertise Google, then that would have worked, but otherwise it would have been a problem. IRR path filters would have helped. When I say AS path filters, I mean that Tier 1 ISP filters than peer lock rather than path. But if you had your IR records in place and you were filtering based on who was allowed to advertise those prefixes, then when you generated that prefix, these people would not have had the IR records in order to advertise those Google routes and the other routes that they hijacked inadvertently, and that would have prevented you from having a problem. Maximum prefix limits might have helped. This is 500 routes. It's a relatively small ISP. There's a possibility that your prefix limits might have been tripped by that extra 500 routes they weren't supposed to have. So those kind of things might have helped you. Now, the next one is the June 24th Verizon outage caused by a route leak. Recall that Verizon listened to a number of routes from a small company in northern Pennsylvania that had a route optimizer. And this company re-advertised those route optimizers' routes, because the route optimizer had created more specific routes, it made this downstream the preferred path of a large quantity of routes transiting Verizon. And there were a couple of problems with this outage. The first was that Verizon was not filtering this peer. So that was the first problem. The second problem is that the peer was using a route optimizer, and I believe Job at one point thought that route optimizers ought to have the ports sealed shut and the equipment destroyed, and I think he said salt the ground upon which the route optimizer salespeople had walked. There are some people with very strong feelings about route optimizers. This is why. Anyway, so that RPKI in this case would have dropped any invalid origin routes or prefixes with invalid links, possibly more efficiently than the current IR method. So that would have been a win here. The bad paths, however, would still have been a problem. Max prefix limits would have shut down the session before they could have done any damage. And the reason why I know that is because at Hurricane Electric, we have max prefix limits for all of our peers as well. And in this case, that is what is the first thing that stopped this from coming through. Paths also would have saved us because we had paths on what we expected from Verizon or filtering. So we had a number of ways to be able to solve this difficulty ourselves, but RPKI actually would have helped in this case. So as you can see, depending on what mayhem happens on the internet, RPKI, is certainly a good thing to implement it, but it's not going to solve all our problems. And then, since we've discovered it can't solve all of our problems, I want to start talking about what we could do with RPKI to make it even better. And the first thing I discovered from filtering RPKI on our network is that while it can solve some issues, the system is still actually capable of creating them. The second week into our implementation of RPKI, I found that when I was filtering for ROAs, I actually caused a problem that someone didn't anticipate. I had a customer who had registered some IP space from one AS to another with the RIR, and he submitted the routes to us and called up very indignantly because he could see we were dropping them and we weren't accepting his routes. He didn't, however, look at routing.he.net, which would have told him exactly why, but he called us up and was very, very irate. And so I went and looked at his thing, and I could see that the IRR records were indeed passing, but we were dropping them as RPKI invalids. And that was because even though he had registered the route with the new AS at the RIR, there apparently was an old ROA from the previous AS, and those do not automatically get deleted when you register the prefix with the RIR under a new AS. So I guess the lesson is that, one, if he had created a ROA, that would have solved the problem because they would have found the old one and they wouldn't have let him create it, and then he would have had to fix it then. But the other gotcha is that if you have changed routes from another AS and you don't know where they came from, maybe it's a merger, maybe it's some IP space that you have from a very long time ago, you probably should look and see if there's a valid ROA for the AS from whence it came and make sure it gets destroyed, because otherwise your traffic is not going to get routed. Also, while you're at it, just create a ROA. So this leads me into the second thing that could make RPKI even better, which is path validation. As we know, IRR path validation suffers from the same issues that its origin validation does. It's not current, and it's not secure. And IRR path validation only prevents against accidental route announcements because, as we know, if you have an AS set and you want to advertise someone else's routes, all you have to do is add their AS to your AS set as a member, and you're good to go. It doesn't matter whether that ISP wants you to advertise their routes or not. You now have, air quotes, permission to advertise their routes. So so for that reason, if you were deliberately trying to do something you weren't supposed to, then the IRR path is not a lot of help. It only helps in cases where someone fat fingers a route and accidentally advertises a prefix that they're not supposed to, and then IRR path validation will save you. So how it works today is that networks tell you what downstreams or peers they want to advertise for other networks, and that's really the only way we have validating path. So the origin AS is responsible for making sure that it has a valid origin, making sure it's registered properly. And then its upstream provider will validate that origin, and then it will provide path validation. It will create a path saying, I can advertise this AS's routes and my own, and then it forwards it to the next level, whatever upstreams it has, and the upstreams are responsible for verifying the origin and verifying the path. What if the advertising network, however, had to specify which networks could advertise its routes? So then we would have, in a scenario like this, the origin AS would be responsible for origin validation and path validation, saying that, yes, I'm validating this, or I have this valid origin, I've registered it with the IRR, and I am registering permission for these ASs to advertise my routes. Then the provider would verify the origin and add path validation, because it would have to add path validation to advertise the routes to the next tier. And then the top tier would be verifying the origins and verifying the paths of its downstreams. And under this scenario, what at Hurricane Electric we're thinking is that we might have a little bit better chance of controlling what you actually want to advertise on the internet. An example of how this might work is if we were, at Hurricane Electric and we were working with somebody like Cloudflare, AS6939 would accept prefixes from AS1335 with origins that were caret, $1335. and that would be accepted. And let's say that Cloudflare also identified Telia as an upstream, for example. And we would say, okay, well, we're going to accept routes that are caret 1299_1335 $. So we accept that path. All other paths would be dropped as invalid. In a scenario like that, you could then Cloudflare or Google or anybody else who was getting their routes hijacked, it wouldn't work because anybody who was advertising those prefixes, except for the ones they had identified, would not be accepted. Another thing that we actually had discussed that I didn't put on the slides is that in addition to having identifying upstreams, some of the bigger providers, like the larger networks like Google and Facebook and Cloudflare and that are everywhere, they could also say that, hey, only accept routes from me because they are everywhere, and if they lost a peer in one location or even a whole geographic location, they'd still be advertising routes to networks from multiple places, and then you would know. So that would give an opportunity to also cut down on the amount of churn these big services see because their routes get hijacked. Obviously, I don't have all the answers, but as a community, we can definitely find them. And what we're proposing is that we begin discussing a way to create some kind of path validation within RPKI and work together to devise some simple solutions. And at this meeting, we're asking for anyone who would like to collaborate. A lot of people know where I am. If you don't, please contact me at Hurricane Electric or anybody you see from Hurricane Electric if you're interested and we'd like to get this conversation started. So again, I would like to thank you for your time and ask anyone if they have any questions.
Thank you very much, Susan. I'm just going to check all the social channels if there's anybody who has any questions. It's a good time to ask them now. There hasn't been any so far, but I'm just going to give people a minute or two to say, hey, I have a question. So if you have a question, even though you're at slow typer, just say hello, and I'll wait for you to type out your question. And just for the people on the stream, there are two ways of asking questions now. You can do it at Slack, as we've advertised before. There's also the possibility, if you can't do the whole Slack thing, there's a possibility to do a comment on the live stream as well. I will try to keep an eye out for it. There's a question coming up, 2 questions coming up. We'll just give people a moment to type them out. And let's see, then we have the first one on IRC. Let's see. Yeah. So here's a question from Julian Freeman. It's how long until we see RPKI at universally deployed?
At what? University of what?
Deployed. So when will we see RPKI used universally?
I imagine that it's going to be a case a lot similar to IRR, which records which actually aren't universally they're universally deployed, but they're not universally implemented. For example, the IRR records would have prevented the problem that we saw on June 24th for Verizon, but Verizon wasn't filtering based on IRR records. And unfortunately, that's the case with a lot of ISPs. I do believe that the more ROAs that get involved, that get registered, the more networks that begin filtering on RPKI valids and invalids will force the issue to get to at least the amount of adoption that we have for IRRs today. But it's a free country. If you want to run your network badly, unfortunately, you still can.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question here, Søren Friis Rosjak. He asked, is the key takeaway for this session that you will now be filtering RPKI invalids on all sessions, both customers and peerings from now on?
That we are filtering for RPKI invalids?
On both customer sessions and peering sessions?
Yes, we have been doing that since the 24th of February.
Okay.
As I would like to point out, 30 days before NTT, not that I'm counting, Job.
I'm sure that's noted somewhere. All right, here's another question. It's from Gordon Gidolfalvi from KTH in Stockholm. He writes, I'm currently doing a study in RPKI adoption. You mentioned that you were monitoring RPKI in village for quite a while now. Do you happen to keep historical records on the scene round announcements? And if yes, do you happen to publish public data sets?
You know, for the bgp.he.net, I'm not sure if we keep historical data in the database, but if you forward your contact information to Alan, I can get back to you on that.
Absolutely. Leave your contact details with me on Slack or something. I will forward them to Susan.
And my email address is susan@he.net, so if you want to.
Yeah. A quick question here again from Julia. What will happen first, universal IPv6 or universal RPKI?
You know, that's a funny question, because I was at APNIC, and there was somebody that was predicting that we would be dual stacked on IPv4 and IPv6 until like 2045. I really hope that guy is wrong. But, but I would honestly, I would say that our RPKI will probably be first, because you don't have to shut anything down for universal RPKI adoption. And whereas our IPv4, you know, it will kind of have to die before V6 will be universally adopted.
All right. So I think there's no further questions. I'd like to thank you very much for coming and speaking here, Susan. And we have a little thing for you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Before we go on to the next topic, I would just quickly like to just thank some people here, and that's specifically the other sponsors that I haven't been mentioning so far. And besides NetNod, that we already thanked here, we have two gold sponsors. That is Concha and Cisco together, and SecData come together with Juniper and NetNordic. We have two silver sponsors, NLIX and Flex Optics, and we have three associate sponsors this year, Arista, the Danish Internet Exchange, and Interaction. And without their help, we couldn't even do any of the stuff we do here. So we are very grateful for their help as well. So we are running a little bit behind schedule, but I think we'll catch up eventually. We have now a talk from the RIPE NCC, and maybe they're better at making this presentation full screen than I am. Control L. Let's try that. Yeah. Please give them an applause.
Hello, hello. This is going to be fun. It's going to be Natalie and me together. Oops, I don't know, does this work? So we're first going to do a short introduction, like a summary of, like an overview of some new developments of some of the RIPE NCC tools and data sets that we have. And we're also looking for some feedback for some of it. And then, because originally this was planned for the very, very, very last slot on Friday afternoon, we felt like we should do something fun and not bore you with a long, like half-hour long technical presentation. So we've prepared a quiz. So Natalie is going to run this. It's going to be real challenging now, and it's a different time slot and also more remote, but I'm sure it'll work. It'll be fun. So let's get started with the slides. We do this, we are kind of swapping around and then cover a few topics, so it's a bit of a mixed bag of some of our stuff that you're probably familiar with, but there are some new developments. For instance, RIPE Atlas, if you've missed that, we have like the fourth version now of the hardware probes, little probes that look like this. There are currently about 11,000 of them connected. They're a lot more distributed, but not all of them are connected all the time, but there are about 11,000 connected. Here in Denmark, there are around 150, and I think about the same number is abandoned or disconnected. So if you have one of those at home, or maybe one of the older versions, please check that they're still sending data, and so that people can use the measurement data. Here's some information also on the current hardware that's in those little boxes. So this version we've actually manufactured ourselves pretty much. It had a bit of a challenge in the end because there are all kinds of regulation apparently and legalities around being a manufacturer, and we hadn't really foreseen that. But it's all been solved now. And on top you can see the type of measurements these probes are doing. It's the same as from the beginning. The ping trace routes, anti-TP measurements, and HTTP only to the anchors, so not from probe to probe. And yeah, you can apply some of the probes there. I mean, they're still coming in badges. Here's some information about the anchors. So that's like the larger version of the RIPE Atlas probes. You can use as targets also if you have a small probe. Then you can also do HTTP measurements, for instance. There are about 650 of them worldwide right now, and we also started to do virtual anchors. So these VM anchors, they're quite popular. There are 250 distributed right now, which makes it a bit easier to use those. So they're a bit larger. They're basically like the smaller probes, but they allow for more measurements. They have more memory, and you can use them as targets for other probes as well. And then the latest news are the software probes. And people have asked us for a long time, when this is coming, wouldn't it be a good idea to distribute them rather than having these little hardware probes shipping around the world and asking people to plug them into their networks? Couldn't we just use like software to measure, for the measurement infrastructure? And so we just released those in February, and they're quite popular. So they're already almost 300, I think, now registered. You can run them like on your virtual machines. There are some requirements, and then you can see there a list of what they're currently supporting. There have been some comments and questions, if you could support other platforms as well, and we're working on that. And I don't know if you've seen this before. This is not that new, but I still think it's kind of cool. Some of my colleagues have been working on this. It's a combination of RIPE Atlas data and I think some of the APNIC data. And it basically provides like a snapshot of the interconnections of a country. So kind of the end-to-end connections between customers in a certain country. And so I have here, for instance, one for Denmark. I hope you can see this. So it's basically measuring the connections from end users in one network to end users in another network. And it does depend, obviously, on the distribution of probes. So the more Atlas probes in a country, the better. And you can see, for instance, there the orange dots in the middle are exchange points. The blue ones are transit providers. And the size of the ring around is the size of the network. So basically the market share of a certain ISP. So here in Denmark, you'd see like TDC has quite a large market share, and then there comes like Telenor and so forth. And then we're only measuring those networks that have like 1% or more of the market share. So the gap on top is basically a lot more like little smaller ISPs that are around there, but they don't have more than 1% of the market. And it's interesting to see. You can go on the website. I think on the earlier slide I had the link there. You can go there and put in a different country. And also over time, you can see per month how things change. It's quite interesting how fluid the network actually is in a country. Yeah, the ones that are grayed out, I don't know if you can see that. At the bottom, there's one that basically just means we don't have enough Atlas probes, so we don't have enough data in that network. So that might be also a good incentive for people to see if they're actually in that network. Maybe they can put up a probe there. I think that comes to you.
Yeah. So from me, a very quick update on RIPEStat. RIPEStat is widely used and mostly through APIs, and so people use it a lot for monitoring the network, but we also have still a lot of actual page views. So that's why we decided to also work on a new RIPEStat UI, because sometimes it's not that obvious or too visible where to find certain information. So we will have a faster, more modern interface, and long awaited, it will be mobile friendly. Yeah, yeah. So the URL is already there for you to try it out. It will come a bit later in the year that we launch it as the front page. But for now, you can already play with it, provide us with feedback. So if you have any idea on what should appear first or preferences, now is the time to let us know. Please do so. And also, I know for you Danish, English is almost native, but for a lot of countries, English is not. So we also had a lot of requests to provide different languages as well. So now we have built-in support for the 8 languages, Russian, for example, Arabic, Turkish, but also Spanish will be there. And users can upload translations as well. So if you want to have a Danish Ripestat, then you can contribute to the translations there as well, if you want. Yeah? That's you.
A bit of a song and dance here today between Natalie and me. Yeah, I threw in some slides about this. It's not a new thing again, like the RIPE routing information service that we've been providing over many, many years. And we have a lot of historic routing data in that system, and it's been used a lot by researchers and operators alike. But we've been thinking of what kind of data does RIS actually provide, and is it a good, diverse set of data? And so one of my colleagues has actually done a bit of a study and dived into the data set and basically looked at where we placing these root collectors and what kind of data do they produce, and do they all add diverse data, or is there more of the same if you add yet another root collector to yet another IXP, for instance? And so there's a link at the bottom. You can see an article there on our Web Labs blog. But so the main results, I'm not going to explain the whole thing here, but it's basically a matrix of all the peers of all the root collectors and the data that they produce. And Emil has developed some kind of methodology to compare the data sets and see how similar they are. So basically all the peers, what they're contributing to the data set, and how like a similarity score, basically. And the darker the lines, the more similar they are. So, and you can see on the website, you can dive in a bit more and see which root collectors produce what kind of data. As you can see on the left hand is the data set for IPv4, on the right hand is the data set for IPv6. So the data produced by the IPv6 networks is much more diverse at the moment than the one than the IPv4 data set. So but that's something we're currently working on, and so we're thinking about if there's maybe a better strategy to provide those, to place those root collectors. So at the moment they're basically, people just put them there for the good of the internet, so it's a bit of a bias for, like, I don't know, Emil had like this scientific kind of term, and what kind of a bias. It's basically a bias towards people who know what they're doing and who know what RIS is, and it's kind of the core network that we're measuring. But maybe there are other strategies. Maybe there are other networks that we're not, that produce different BGP streams that we should actually measure. So that's just something we're currently working on in our research department. And it, of course, also has an influence on tools like, for instance, RIS Live that we've just announced. Recently, it's quite popular. It basically provides a live stream of the routing information services data, the BGP data in real life, which is more useful. It provides alerts and acknowledgements for your network operations, so you can play with it. It was quite well received. It's been announced also a couple of months ago on the Web Labs blog. I think it's back to you. Oh, no. Just a summary here of some of the tools that we are working on. So there's a website now on Web Labs. There's a page with all our prototypes and tools that are currently under development. And you can see there what status they're in, if they're in prototype or if they're in production. And you can click on that and see what the tools actually do and provide us with feedback. So it's a bit of a playground on the Labs platform. And so all of these tools, some of these tools I mentioned, they're also covered there. And it's over to you again.
Okay, very short, just 2 slides, and then we start with the quiz. If you're at home and you know the concept, go to kahoot.it already. More instructions will follow. So, I did some analysis on how Denmark was doing with RPKI. We just had an RPKI talk, and I looked at the percentage of addresses, IPv4, and how many of those addresses were covered by Aroa. And that's a little bit on the low side compared to other countries. So in the Netherlands, 76% of the addresses are covered by Aroa, Norway 43%, Sweden 49%, and Denmark is at 40%. So I urge you today, since you're sitting at home behind your laptop anyway, and not here in the room, create your ROAS. And then see if we can bump up Denmark by the end of the day to see if we can at least pass, let's say, shall we do Norway or Sweden? Let's start by passing Norway. That should be achievable. But your accuracy, so what we see in BGP matching against Aroa, your accuracy is really good. So the accuracy for Denmark is 100%. That means that there is a direct link between what we see in BGP and the ROAS that so far have been created. So don't just generate any ROAS, actually have them make sense so that you don't lose the 100%. So yeah, that's my message basically for today. Sign your ROAS. And with that, that brings us to the end of this short presentation. Now, questions. Yes. I'll wait a little bit for questions.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, to go to the fun and chaotic part, you can already go at home to kahoot.it. And I'll just wait for questions a bit.
All right. So if you have any questions on the live stream, please just indicate that you have a question, and then we'll wait for you to type it out. There's one question already. Lasse Jarlskov wants to know. He has questions for the user-to-user connection visualization. Where do you get the end-user market share data from?
Yeah, I believe that's the data that's provided by the APNIC. And I'm sorry if I didn't put the source on the slide. I can provide that later. So it's a mix. This is actually just taken out of a longer presentation that I've been giving on this. So it's basically a mix of certain data sets. And that particular part is something that the APNIC is measuring with their Google Ads measurements that they've been doing for a few years.
All right. Is there any other questions? I saw some people typing, but please indicate whether you have a question. Yes. Gordon asks whether you can add RPKI validation data to the RIS live feed.
Ooh, not yet. But it is something that we're looking into. Also, I saw a question earlier to Suzanne about historical data for the invalid information. We are setting all that data up because we do have that data, but we just have to still incorporate it in RIPEStat and in RIS Live. Yeah, but it's coming.
Okay, excellent. I think people are anxiously waiting for a pin.
Yeah, I can imagine.
For the
Yay!
Kahoot.
I like a little bit of chaos. I think this is a good moment before we go to coffee. So, here we go. On the screen, you will see the URL kahoot.it, or you can use the app on your phone, and it requests a game pin and your nickname. I know that there is around between an 8 and a 12-second lag between the moment I'm standing here and that you see the question or the information on your screen. So to accommodate for that, we have the questions open for 20 seconds. That should work. But of course, it doesn't work as well with you guys remote as all in the room, but you have the same disadvantage. So I see some people here in the room playing. You're disqualified. Yeah, okay, or you have to count till 10 before answering. Yeah. So I saw that we have 157 people on the live stream. Let's see how far we can stretch this in a Kahoot remotely. Oh, yes, we have prizes.
222 right now.
222. Guys, bring it on. And girls. And we have now 40 players in the room here. We have prizes. Let me convince you to join. Yeah, of course. Okay. The first prize is the, by now, extremely limited edition of the IPv6 towel, and it's really, really big.
For your famous like winter ice water
It
dive.
also works as a blanket for the cold. It also functions as a cape. So that's the first prize. The second prize, is a surprise goodie bag with items that we basically collected from all over our office. But it includes, for example, a mug. Yeah, everything's in plastic. I haven't touched anything. It has a lot of different stuff in there.
Yes.
Surprise bag.
Geeky
50
stuff.
players.
Yes.
That's also the third prize. So the second and third prize are the same. And in the fourth prize, we brought a extremely limited edition. You want this Ripe Atlas t-shirt. And that comes with another IPv6 mug. No. Okay, so we've got 48 players. 47. You guys are leaving. What's with this? Okay. 48. I think we're a bit stagnating now at this number.
Let's do it.
Shall we just start? Let's get started. Let's wait till we have 50 players. Yes. Okay, I'm going to start. So,
Control L.
Control L.
Oh, F11. I'm sorry.
F11? Oh, full screen. This keyboard is interesting. Function keys on top. F11. No, I don't think so. Okay. Yeah, there is an F11 here. Got it. Excellent. Okay. 54 by now. I'm going to hit start. Arbitrary. 15 questions. There we go. Easy one to start with. So you see 4 colored boxes on your screen, and you have to select the one with the right color. Okay, so it goes really fast, right? So, but we still had a lot of people answering, so you have to be really, really quick at home. Are we getting complaints yet on the social media channels? I expect them any moment now. Okay, so this was an internet measurement platform. Still, 4 people said geolocation for IP addresses, a UI for the RIPE database. No. FaceTime for RIPE NCC members. No, just no. Okay, hands ready? Next up. Oh, there. Decade. Is Decade here in the room? Ah, he is in the room. Okay. And Julia is also in the room. Okay. Hugge is in the room? Yeah, okay. Guys, you are disqualified. You can't play. Sorry, no, because we don't see any remote people here. Otherwise, we really will get complaints. So please don't play for the next question. Here we go. How many connected probes are there in Denmark? Go quick. Now the number of answers is getting quick. Yes, this makes more sense. 147, well done. You did pay attention. That's cool. Okay, next up. So I think we found a flow now. Let's see here. Aha, now we have a completely changed scoreboard. Guido Falvi? That's a remote one. That's well, Nicholas, Filippo, Lars. You guys either have really fast internet connections.
The delay is like 5 seconds or something.
5. The delay is 5 seconds, so it's not that bad.
No.
Okay, cool. Next question. What cannot be measured with Atlas? Go, 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 go. Nice. Okay, cool. Yeah, the questions are easy. That's nice. Some same, yeah, pretty much the same. Okay, next. Aha. If you paid attention. Yeah, I can see the lag time because I can see when the questions are coming in, the answers are coming in, yeah. Nice, but here you see already a little bit of a distribution of some answers. Ooh, we have some changes here, but Guido Valfi is doing good. Solid on top. Try to keep that up. Are we getting comments on social media yet? People going nuts? Everything okay? Can people still follow? So far, so good?
There are a few people who will get timeouts before they get the questions, unfortunately.
Oh,
but
yeah.
yeah, another unfortunate victims of the coronavirus.
Oh dear, oh no. Okay, next up. What do you need to create a ripe atlas measurement? Is it a ripe membership? Is it money? Oh, it's credits. It's credits. And yeah, number 2 was the right membership. No, you can just get a probe. You don't have to be a member. You can be anywhere in the world. Don't have to be a member, and you can just set up your probe. And then, but you do get extra credits if you're a member, I believe, right, Miriam? Yeah. But the correct answer is you just need credits, and you don't have to be a member. Cool. Okay. Now, the difference between MT and Guido Valfi is creeping up a little bit, but let's see. Still possible. You have to use your own probe to create a measurement. You could steal somebody else's credentials. Okay, that is well-known knowledge. Good. Oh la la. 6 answers in a row. Nice. He's standing outside here, the door. What is RIS Life? You just heard this. Nice. Okay, cool. Yeah, the last one, near real-time mirroring, that was a little bit tricky. That's NRTM, that's another service of us. Look at that. Okay, now that's a full question ahead. Moving on, quickly. What info can you get from RIS? If you never heard of wrist, this one is not easy. Yeah, okay, not bad. 28, we've got still around 40 people still playing. Not bad, we started with 50, roughly. Whoop, 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 whoop. Nice one. Rosiak, doing good? Aha. That was not in our slides at all. And now I hear some people virtually going like, ooh, I hit the wrong button. Yeah, see? Now you get a bit of a distribution here of, ooh, yes. So no, it is 2A10/12. And now you will never forget.
You did that deboganizing.
Yeah, we did the whole deboganizing before we actually start giving blocks out from that. Cool. Okay, so let's see what this did for the score. Okay. Nothing for the top 2, I think. Tough round. 4 players lost their answer streak of 6. Yeah. It doesn't get easier. This one. Good luck. And even in the room, they're going like, what? And you don't have any time because you're remote. Okay, I'm gonna explain, don't worry. After the okay, yep, 2 correct, yeah.